Hi, this is Copia, and I saw a post on Reddit that was asking if anyone did any breakdowns of their decks and why they chose to put certain cards in their decks and avoid others. And I mentioned that I had a Stealth Haley deck that I could probably do that with, and the poster seemed to be interested, so here I am. Let's go. So, when making a deck for the first time, I think about what do I want to do? Do I want to make a deck that synergizes together and then pick an identity for that deck? Or do I want to pick an identity and sort of build a deck that synergizes around that identity? In this instance, I saw Haley Kaplan and I liked her ability very much. So I decided I would like to build a deck around her ability. And her ability is the first time you install a card each turn, you install another card of the same type from your grip, paying all costs. And so that implies that you want a lot of programs and or hardware and or resources to take advantage of that as often as you can. So the deck should probably be heavy in those and minimize the number of events. You don't necessarily want to eliminate events because events are good, but you want a deck that's heavy in the non-event cards, and you also want the deck to be balanced since the other card has to be the same type, so you can't have just a couple resources and expect to install a bunch of resources. So taking advantage of her ability, which basically gets you clicks, seems pretty powerful on the face of it. Gets you extra clicks, which are very much a premium. Think about what kind of deck works with that ability. That kind of deck that works with that ability is a deck that likes to install a lot of resources or hardware or programs or any combination of them. And so if you're installing a lot of any type of card, you need one of two things. You need either a bonkers economy to be able to afford to install those cards, or all those cards need to be cheap. So you start thinking, what kind of deck has a lot of cheap installs they want to make that also gains an advantage from being able to rapidly make those cheap installs? And the obvious answer is Stealth. Stealth uses a lot of hardware and resources to fuel them, and those are very low cost, usually 0 or 1 to install. Same thing with the programs in a Stealth deck, they're generally pretty cheap. So Stealth is the obvious answer, and that's what I went with. So I started to make a Stealth Haley deck. So here's my Stealth Haley deck, stealthily. So in any runner deck, you need two main things. You need breakers and money, because the runner needs to be able to get in and access. And so what you use to do that is breakers and money. So I'll go through the breakers first. This is a Stealth deck, so it uses, of course, Refractor. Refractor is really strong. Fantastic code gate breaker. It's a no-brainer. There's not really a good stealth barrier breaker. Black Cat's pretty awful. It eats up a lot of stealth credits, and if you're not using stealth credits, it's really expensive. So I went with Corroder. It's an efficient way to go. You could, in a Shaper deck, also go with Lady. And in a stealth deck, Lady's actually really good because it's very credit efficient, and stealth decks tend to run light on real credits. But in this instance, I did not want to include all of the support cards that are required to run Lady, so I went with Corroder. And then you have your stealth support cloaks, great out of Shaper. Not only can they be used for stealth boosting, but they can also be used just on any old icebreaker, so they're usable with Corroder. They're just all around good credits to have. So then you've got your barrier and code gate set. The question now is, do you want Switchblade or do you want Dagger? Because a big benefit of running a stealth deck is the fact that you get those two very good killers. In this instance, for this deck, I originally built it for the Philadelphia Regionals. Here it's edited a little bit for new cards that have come out, but I originally built it for the Philadelphia Regionals, and at the time, the meta was very heavy RP. Still kind of is, I guess, but very heavy RP, multi-sub, sentries, not a lot of stacked sentries going on. So I went with Switchblade. Switchblade is super efficient. It requires 2 stealth credits per sentry break, but it's super efficient. You run into a pup, it costs 1 stealth credit and you break both. You run into Susanoo no Mikoto and you get through it for 2 stealth credits without having to spend anything else. It saves you a lot of credits, especially against like a Tsurugi that's only 2 stealth credits, and it saves you a lot of real credits. So that's what I included. Dagger is perfectly valid inclusion, depending on what you're facing. If you're facing a lot of stacked sentries, Dagger would be a better choice. You also get that 2 influence back, which is very nice. So that's the breaker suite. So you need breakers and money, right? So now we think about the financial suite. And everything you do in the deck is kind of connected to everything else. So focusing on one aspect at a time kind of does not give you the connection between other parts of the deck, but we'll do our best here. So I've got Daily Cast, one of my favorite cards. It makes so much sense out of Haley since it's a resource that can be combined with installing other resources. It gets you a decent amount of money. Passively, it's great. Sure Gamble, mainstay. You need a way to burst up your credits. That's great. Armitage Code Busting. It's 1 credit to install, so it's cheap. If it's we need cheap things to install criteria. It's basically a mini magnum opus, which I did not want to include magnum opus because the stealth suite takes up a lot of memory on its own. There's not really spare memory for magnum opus. So Armitage Code Busting gets you that quick piggyback install off of Daily Cast, say, or any other resource for just $1, and it gets you a good source of quick burst up credits. Great for the early game. Love it. And so now we've got recurring credits for stealth, and this kind of ties into Icebreaker Suite. So we've got Lockpick and Silencer. Those are necessary to power the stealth suite, and they also basically count as economy, so I'll include those here. So Lockpick and Silencer. And Ghost Runner, also very important for powering the stealth suite. We've got a lot of sources of stealth credits between Cloak, Ghost Runner, Lockpick, and Silencer. So we're looking good there. All of the runner decks are going to need real credits in order to do things like trash corporation assets so that the corporations don't use their assets to get too far ahead. So if you look at this economy suite, it's a little bit difficult to be sustained. You're going to run out of real credits eventually. There's no real infinite source of credits in here. So I included one of Katie Jones so that later in the game, once it gets to the point where you're set up and you need just a continuous source of credits that won't exhaust, you can use her. And that's why she's just a one of, not more than one, because I'd rather be able to burst up early with Armitage and Daily Cast and Sure Gamble. She doesn't really do the early burst thing. She's great for the later game, but I don't really need her before then, so she's down here. So then I think, like, okay, I've got these cards. How am I going to draw them? And I also think about how much economy will I really need? I've got all these economy cards, but is that enough economy? So I start to think about draw engines in here. And the runner has to go fast to run a stealth deck. Stealth takes time and in cards to set up, which is part of the reason why it's good out of Haley, since she speeds up the setup of the stealth deck. And one of the major limiting factors in that is going to be drawing your cards and being able to afford to install them. So this economy is a good baseline economy, but in between trashing things and installing the programs you need, it runs out fast. So you could go one way with clickless install or clickless draw and take Diesel and Earthrise Hotel and go that direction and use your credits to install other things. I went with Professional Contacts. It becomes an economy card and a draw card, both kind of together. Gain $1 and draw a card. And what that basically lets you do is it lets you spend your clicks drawing cards without falling behind economically. It's tough to install since it costs 5 credits. It will set you back economically at the beginning, but because everything else you want to install is like 1 credit, 1 credit, 1 credit, 1 credit, 1 credit, 1 credit, 2 credits, you kind of get the credits that you need to install the cards as you draw them, which is great. That's fantastic. So I go with Professional Contacts, and you need 3 since you want to see this right in your opening hand. It allows your other economy cards to power your runs. It allows your other economy cards to give you money that can be used to trash things, while giving you the baseline money to install your stuff while you draw it. And so oftentimes I'll have turns where I draw 3 times, gain 3 credits, and install 2 things. It's great. So that's why I have Professional Contacts. The clickless draw is nice with Diesel and Earthrise Hotel, but it gets a little expensive because Earthrise Hotel does cost 4 to install. That can be mitigated with things like Career Fair, but it's still kind of an annoying hit. It works out if it lets you draw into an economy card, which ideally it will, but I prefer Professional Contacts personally. I don't think there's anything wrong with Earthrise Hotel and Diesel. I think that's another strong way to go. I just personally prefer Professional Contacts. So I've got my money, programs, and draw now, right? And I've got my support cards for the stealth deck. So now I got to think about how, once I do get in, how am I going to win? And so you look at multi-access for this. You know, once you do get in, how do you maximize your accesses? So multi-access is one of the ways that you make each time you run better. And you're looking at, with a stealth deck, being able to basically run once per turn. So every time you run, you want to maximize the access, since you won't be able to do it again that turn. So event access like Maker's Eye or Legwork aren't that strong, since you're going to reliably be able to get in once per turn instead of other decks that maybe make 1 power run every so often, which is what Maker's Eye really helps you with, 1 kind of power run. So every time you get in, you want to be maximizing your run, and that's why I went with R&D interface, since I can fairly reliably get in once per turn. I want to be able to get an extra access once per turn, and R&D interface is the easiest, simplest way to do that. It's great. It's fantastic. I want to be running once per turn, and the Maker's Eye only happens once every very so often, depending on how many times you get it to the same old thing, or how many you have in your deck. So I want more multi-axis. That R&D interface is great. So that's my multi-axis. And then I look at my program rig and what my final setup is going to look like. I've got corroder, refractor, switchblade, great. I've got cloaks, those take up memory, so one of each of my breakers and one cloak hits me at my memory limit. And I've also got self-modifying codes, and I know that I'm going to want the flexibility to install more cloaks, or when I plan my meta check cards, they're probably going to include programs, so I want to be able to install those. So I'm probably going to need more memory, and I want cheap memory, since the whole theory of the deck is install a lot of cheap things. Luckily, Shaper has good cheap memory. Astrolab and Akamatsu Memchip, both 1 credit to install. You get that credit from professional contacts as you draw it. It's great. And I decided to go with 2 Astrolabe and 1 Akamatsu Memchip. The alternative would be 1 Astrolabe and 2 Akamatsu Memchip. The reason being is I want to be able to install more than 1 cloak plus something else. And if I'm installing more than 1 cloak, I'm going to need at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 memory. And if I install something else, that pushes me to 6, but then maybe I can just have 1 cloak instead of 2. So because of the fact that I mostly want 5 memory and I rarely want 6 memory, I went with 2 Astrolabe, because the card draw is really useful to speed up this deck against things like NEH and Replicating Perfection. And so 2 of these lets me try to see the Astrolabe earlier, as compared to 2 Akamatsu Memchips, in which case I'd be more likely to just get an Akamatsu Memchip earlier. So I still potentially want 5 memory. I mean, 2 cloaks is better than 6 memory. Sorry, 3 cloaks is great. 2 cloaks and a pocket other card are great too. So I still want to be able to eventually get to 6 memory. So just having 1 Akamatsu Memchip is fine. So other meta checks, I'm thinking, what is this deck weak against? It takes some time to set up. Fast Advance does not take a lot of time to set up, so how can I slow that down? I got Clot. Slot the Clot, whatever. Clot's great for... I need to give myself a little bit of breathing room to install the rest of my stuff. Clot fits the bill, put in Clot. What's the other weakness? The other weakness would be stacking things like sentries or annoying barriers, since my barrier breaker is not as efficient as my sentry or code gate breaker. And so if I'm worried about stacking barriers or stacking sentries, which can exhaust stealth credits against Switchblade very easily, I might want some way to be able to easily break a couple of stacked programs. And usually those programs are going to be the same-ish. And even if they're not the same-ish, there are other programs out there. In particular, things like Ashigaru, or things like putting up multiple architects or multiple caduceuses that make it easy to get through with an Atman, since they're going to probably be around the same strength. Atman's also nice for oddly priced cards. Maybe you get a stack of things on a server that's really exhausting your stealth breakers, or that's really expensive for Corroder. 4-strength Atman is always strong. It's also nice because Atman can use the cloaks to set its strength, so if you happen to not be running sometime but you know you want the Atman, you can utilize your spare cloak credits to put power counters on Atman. Atman's just a perfect pocket breaker for this kind of thing. You know, they've got 2 two architects in a row and you don't have 4 stealth credits every turn for just Switchblade, put out Natman at 3. They do stacked Eli's, put out Natman at 4. It's fine. Do it. Use it for whatever you need it for. Then I'm thinking, what else is this deck weak to? It doesn't have a lot of real credits. It leans on the recurring stealth credits to be able to get in. So it's kind of weak to any deck that does a C-Source or particularly a mid-seasons. Something that really takes advantage of your lack of real credits. So you need to cover that death threat. And the easiest way to mitigate C-Source is with a Plascrete Carapace. I originally had 2 of these, but I had a spare Influence, so I threw down a Utopia Shard also. Took out one of them and replaced it with a Utopia Shard. These just need to get you by 1 turn when they C-Source you, so that you can drop the tag the next turn and be still alive. Plascrete Carapace gets this by just blocking the damage wholesale. Utopia Shard can remove the cards that they need from their hand. Utopia Shard is also nice because it can have a negative effect on other types of decks, certain combos. So Utopia Shard's good in more situations than just Plascrete Carapace. So that protects you from the C-Source angle. Mid-season is a huge problem. And this deck didn't really have a great solution to mid-seasons until Film Critic came out. Film Critic is fantastic for avoiding the mid-seasons. It's just, I can't even describe how much of a change this has made for dealing with things like Butcher Shop decks, or big in my meta is Harpsichord Studio Kill deck. It's Film Critic helps so much. It avoids the mid-season problem. I have 2 of these in here because I believe that is a common enough thing that I will very often need Film Critic. And it also is nice because this deck doesn't have, again, a lot of real credits a lot of the time. So things like NAPD contracts are annoying. You can Film Critic it. It's always good against the Future Perfect. Put it on Film Critic. Fetal AI, put it on Film Critic. So it's strong against a lot of things, and it protects against mid-season, which this deck really cannot deal with mid-season at all outside of Film Critic. So those 2 cards are great. So now self-modifying code I didn't talk about, but that's kind of self-explanatory. Gets you whatever you need out of your icebreakers. It's your icebreaker and program tutor. Gets you your clot, whatever. Now I only have 2 clone chip because I'm not expecting to really do any silly clone chip shenanigans. Clone chip's there to get back breakers that somehow get trashed. Somehow. Maybe through Marcus Batty, or you ran without your Switchblade for some god-awful reason. The clone chips get those back. And also, they're good for getting clot back if you need it. They can be used for silly shenanigans with installing self-modifying code in order to allow you to install a program from your hand on some random turn that I've done before. They're useful, but they're not strictly necessary, so I only have 2 instead of 3. And that leaves a couple of card slots. And this deck still kind of likes more economy, but it also wants to install stuff. So I include 2 modded and 2 career fair. This was formerly 3 career fair, but I took one out. I thought it was going to be better spent on other card slots. They help you install stuff for cheap. Modded's great if you draw into your icebreakers. You can use it to install Switchblade or Atman. Career Fair is great for installing daily casts. Getting an opening hand with a Career Fair and a Professional Contacts is just fantastic, and so the opportunity to get that going is too much to pass up, really. Only 2 of each since there's not a ton of targets, but Modded's great for also R&D Interface or Plascrete Carapace. They just cut the hit from installing those cards, and they're great. They're really click efficient since they let you trigger your ability off of them as well. They're just solid cards. Lockpick and Silencer. I want to point out that I only have 2 of each in this deck instead of 3. You really don't need 3 Silencers, even though this is using Switchblade. Silencer takes a lot of influence that's better spent on other things, and between Ghost Runner and Cloak and Silencer, you have enough stealth credits in general to be able to deal with whatever you need to deal with. So I never found that I needed really more than 2. Same thing with Lockpick between the Cloaks and the Ghost Runner, and the fact that Refractor needs fewer stealth credits to run anyway. I just use 2 Lockpicks. And that's the general overview of the deck. I think I hit just about every card. Some thoughts about this deck as it stands now. Switchblade might not be the best choice anymore. A lot of people are stacking Sentries, and Atman isn't necessarily the best solution to that. And there's also things like Data Raven, Sentries, single subroutine Sentries are out now, are on the rise, it seems like. Multi-subroutine Sentries like Pup, which would only take 1 stealth credit with a Switchblade, or Tsurugi, which takes 2 stealth credits, but it saves you so many more on real credits on breaking the subroutines. Those sorts of things I'm not seeing as much anymore. It's more 1 or 2 subroutine Sentries, which still require 2 stealth credits, and only cost 1 extra real credit if you were going to spend 2 stealth credits anyway with a thing like Dagger. So I'm starting to think that Dagger might be a better choice in this deck. And if so, it's going to save me 2 influence. So if I was going to get that 2 influence back and put Dagger in here, I don't really want to change any of the rest of this terribly dramatically. I'd probably put in some Lucky Find instead of 1 Sure Gamble. I'd switch out a Sure Gamble with a Lucky Find. I think the Lucky Find is a much more desirable economy card in this deck. Same thing if I found that Clot was no longer useful, I'd probably replace it with a Lucky Find. I think Lucky Find would do much better in this deck than Sure Gamble. I just don't have the influence for it. And yeah, that's about it. Thanks for listening. Hope I didn't ramble too much, but that's the idea behind this deck. Another thing too is if you found you really wanted the extra memory, you could go to 1 Astrolabe and 2 Akamatsu Mem chips if you wanted to. That's another personal preference thing along with Switchblade. All right. Thanks for listening.